Welcome to the Science for Sport podcast, where we dive into stories and insights that drive peak performance. Join us as we uncover the secrets behind the science of success. Here's your host, Richard Graves.
Hello and welcome to the Science for Sport podcast with me, Richard Graves. This week, we speak to the lead performance nutritionist at England Men's Rugby, Dr. James Morehen. We focus on the significance of game day nutrition protocols, half-time dynamics in a dressing room, and how the correct fuel can enhance post-game recovery. We also extend the conversation to grassroots sport and the need for athletes to understand the impact of nutrition on their own performance and the value of building a community in the field of sports nutrition itself. So, let's hear from him now.
Unlocking sports science to push the limits of human potential. This is the Science for Sport podcast.
Well, for regular listeners to the Science for Sport podcast, this will be a familiar voice on the show. Once again, we're joined by Dr. James Morehen. For those, James, that aren't familiar with your history, it's great to have you back first and foremost. But in a career that spans now, I think I'm right in saying, nigh on 16 years, you've gone from starting at strength and conditioning in snow sports in Poland all the way up to being the lead performance nutritionist with England Men's Rugby at the RFU. So, like I say, for those that maybe aren't familiar with your story, tell us a bit about the path that's brought you here.
Yeah, thanks, Rich, and good to be back on the podcast and just share a little bit of my insight. So, yeah, you touched on it slightly there. I started my sporting kind of career really. I used to play rugby and was an avid fan as a kid, and then did my college studies, and then decided that university at that age wasn't for me. So at 18 to 21, went to Canada and trained as a snowboard instructor. I lived in the Mont Tremblant in Quebec for 2 years, had a third season in Poland, and then, like many of us that work in professional sport, I think deep down we're all failed athletes, if we're being really honest and truthful with ourselves. So we then go and study some form of sports science discipline because we want that energy, we want the adrenaline of game day and competition. So we go and study these sports science disciplines, which allows us to then support and foster and coach and educate our athletes. So I went to Liverpool John Moores. I did my undergrad in sports science, masters in sports physiology, and then rolled straight through into the PhD at LJMU. Loved my time up there. 9 years of higher education, kind of consistently all the way through. And then the stipend of the PhD ran out, or ended, so to speak. So I then had to get a real job. So I applied for a role at England Football, and I was there for 4 years with my colleague, Dr. Chris Rosimus. Absolute fantastic time. Learned so much from him and the organisation, and kind of international football across men's and women's. Worked across all of the pathway teams, which was incredible. And then decided to get back into rugby. So I applied for a role at Bristol Bears, was successful with that, and then I've been leading the nutrition provision at Bristol Bears for 3 years. And then alongside that, I've managed to get my foot in the door, so to speak, with England Rugby. So I've actually been at the RFU now for about 3.5 years, because I had 18 months with the Red Roses to start with, and I've now had approaching 18 months with the senior men. So currently that's my kind of, I guess, full-time consultancy role, if you like, looking after the senior men with England Rugby. And then outside of that, I have my own business where I run the Performance Nutrition Network. So that's a global community of nutritionists and dietitians around the world. And then I work privately with my own clients as well.
Was that always a natural progression in your eyes once you started going down the education route to look into nutrition? Because if we go back to when you were in Canada and then on to Poland, that's, I think I'm right in saying, about 2007, 8, 9. Well, I know Arsene Wenger had come into the Premier League, and for football, it was revolutionary, his ideas around nutrition and that enhancing performance. But it wasn't mainstream as such at that time. So was it a natural progression for you, or was it something that you perhaps were caught unawares by and became interested in and decided to pursue it?
Yeah, the latter, Rich. So I actually, deep down, early days wanted to be an S&C coach. I reflect back and look at my early volunteer experiences and internships, and I spent a whole season at St Helens Rugby League, volunteering as an S&C coach. I did an internship at Liverpool John Moores as a strength and conditioning coach, under the guidance of good friend and colleague Dr. Carl Lang and Evans. And then it was when I started the masters in sports physiology that we started to touch on nutritional related aspects of sports science. So understanding metabolism and biochemistry and what happens when you eat certain foods, and then that really started to spark up my interest. And in particular, Professor Graham Close and Professor James Morton, who taught that masters, and then Graham was then the kind of PhD supervisor for me, the DOS, Director of Studies. And it was on the PhD, so back end of masters PhD, where it then started to turn a little bit more into applied physiology with performance nutrition. So I kind of had the background of I'm not an S&C coach by any stretch of the imagination, and I don't pretend to be, but I had the kind of background of understanding strength and conditioning, and then sports physiology, then into applied physiology with kind of practical performance nutrition. And that's where that love started really. And what was great at the time, my PhD was embedded in rugby league, so I had a year at Widnes Vikings, 2 years at Warrington Wolves, and at this point, really, they kind of hadn't really had performance nutrition support before, so it was a blank canvas, minimal budget, and I really had to just be creative with what I was learning in the day and in the evenings in the library, and then bringing that into the club and trying to get the players to be educated and coached on it, but importantly execute on strategies that I was learning about. And that's where it all started, really.
It's taken you all the way to the very top in England men's rugby. And as we sit here now, we're well ahead of the upcoming Lions tour to Australia. Of course, England men will be going on a summer tour themselves to Argentina. But in the rearview mirror is the recent Six Nations Championship. And given your background, both starting out in S&C and now as the lead nutritionist, when you look at a tournament like the Six Nations, elite level sport at the highest level on the international stage, it's a tournament that goes on for across 2 months. The games come thick and fast, mentally and physically. What are the type of challenges and tolls it takes on each individual involved?
Well, it's just a great tournament, isn't it? It's a great championship, and the history that's involved in the Six Nations and the rivalry that just rears its head every kind of start of a new year. But yeah, look, there's like any competition that's over a format like that, the physical toll is there. And with that comes the mental toll and the cognition and the focus and the recovery and the sleep and the mindset. But these guys love it, the staff love it, and we all kind of rip in together to make sure that we enjoy those campaigns. From a physical standpoint, yeah, look, there's elements of travel in there. Most teams will do some form of warm-up campaign, whether they go overseas or they stay in their country, but they'll do warm-up camps before starting that tournament. And then you play two fixtures, and then you'll have your fallow week. So you're kind of, it's not really a rest week, but it's a week without a game. Then you go into another fixture, another fallow week, and then you finish with the other two fixtures. So there is a congested fixture window in there, but there are also 2 weeks where the games aren't present. And yeah, I mean, rugby is a physical sport, right? It's I know this from my own PhD studies, the exercise induced muscle damage and then the impact induced muscle damage that these players go through without the protective gear that some of the other impact sports have. There's no helmets, there's no big pads that these guys wear. This is bone on bone. This is physical men, gladiatorial against each other. And with that, you get sore muscles, you get sore bodies, there's injuries that happen. But it's our job as sports scientists and medical teams to look after them to the best of our ability. And that involves, of course, the nutrition strategies for genuine fueling and recovery, like giving them everything we possibly can to help those sore muscles repair and regenerate and get ready again. But then also the S&C coaches and the medical teams do an amazing job in terms of periodization of the training, recovery modalities that we put on, the opportunity for the boys to take time out and rest and recover. So it's where it is physical, it is congested, but there's also many other sports that have to deal with that as well.
Yeah, and over recent years, particularly the physical nature of rugby has increased. I'm going to show my age here, but for those of you out there that'll remember the 1987 World Cup, for example, you look at some of the players that played in the pack in those days, and you'd think they're probably better suited physically to playing in the backs, and then that would be questionable in the modern era for sure. But when you factor that in with the challenges of travel requirements, as well as the congested fixture period at such an elite level, how do you take all this and mould it into the nutritional and dietary plans that you and your team put together for the players?
Yeah, it's been smart with our communication with the athletic performance and S&C guys, but also operations and logistics as well. There's constant communication between all parties to ensure that if we're doing a double training day, the fuel availability at breakfast, snacks, lunches, and dinners is enough to warrant the demands that the players are going through. Because yes, we have to fuel for said demands. We then have to ensure that there's in training fuel availability. And then, of course, we then have to recover from the training because we've got another training day tomorrow. So we will always have those comms with the other disciplines and staff members prior to camp. So, we're doing all of our or we have done all of our menus now for the summer tour overseas. And then that's where, working with the chef as well. So we've got Tom Kirby, who's social media famous, shall we say, with all of his videos that go up. But Tom's a great guy, and the relationship that me and him have together to ensure that we're understanding the demands that the boys are going through, what sort of food we need to put out at different times of the day and locations to make sure that they're fueling and recovering properly. And then I just think as well, another thing is the ability to adapt. So there are times where we might go into a different hotel environment, or it's a kitchen that we don't have control of. But that's then the ability of us to create that community with the hotel, get them on our side as soon as, not on our side, but get them to understand the process, understand our strategies, what we're trying to achieve with the food as quick as possible, and make them feel like they're part of our team, so that it all becomes a little bit more seamless for us to deliver the strategy.
Sure, I'd imagine in an ideal world you want consistency in nutrition and diet, but as you've pointed out there, you can't always control some external factors, be it the physical nature of a game being played, injuries picked up, or change of location. So, how important is flexibility in what you and your team do to be able to ensure the maximum performance out of each individual?
Yeah, I think consistency is the key word there, and I think the closer you can keep your strategies to being consistent wherever you are in the world, the better for the player, I would say. However, having said that, when we went to Japan, we wanted to embrace the Japanese food culture. What a glorious part of the world,
But that's
and
different to what the players will
insane.
be used to day in, day out here, isn't it?
Yeah, correct. And there's an element there of kind of the closer it gets towards the game, you kind of keep the familiarity around the food provision that you're providing, because players, the closer it gets to the game, players tend to, they want to stick to their same strategy. But outside of that, we had a glorious opportunity to really get the Japanese hotel chefs to show us what they could do, and boy did they show us what they could do. It was insane to see the level of service that they could put on for us, but also just the local food. It was really good to kind of rip into that. And then similarly, going into Argentina now and then a week in America, on the back of it. We're purposely writing the menus to embrace the local cuisine, and I will have no problems in there to have sections of the menu where we actually say to the chef, chef's dish of the day or chef's salad of the day, and we kind of leave it up to them. Like, there's boundaries within it, but there will be produce in Argentina that are so fresh and tastes so much better than what we can get in the UK, that we want to embrace it and we want to put it out. And also it gives an opportunity for the players to try new tastes, different types of cuisine, different combinations of food. And also, I think every hotel we've ever been to abroad, there's a chef in there that loves sport. They really want to show you what they can produce, and out comes a great dish. So I think it's important that you keep a level of consistency, but also embrace the fact that you're traveling around the world.
Yeah, and let's be honest, for anybody that's had the privilege of being part of any touring party, be it professional or amateur in nature, that is what about going on tour is all about, isn't it? Experiencing the culture, experiencing things that are different to what you're used to at home. But equally, as you say, then come game day, it's game faces on, level heads, and equally there's a regime, I'm sure, that's got to be followed. So what does that look like for an elite level rugby player in terms of meals, timings, carb loads, things like that?
Yeah, I think the overall vision here is the understanding of nutritional periodization. So what we mean by that is the same as an S&C coach would have training periodization. We will then marry the nutrition over the top of that. So if it's a double training day, carb availability on that day will be higher. And we might educate and coach our athletes that anywhere in the region of maybe 3 to 4, potentially 5 gram per kilo of carbohydrate to adequately fuel, recover, and then recover, ready for the next day. There are always, in a Six Nations campaign, you've always got your travel days and you've always got your days where you are on the road. So the carbohydrate availability on those days might be a little bit lower because there isn't any training. Still want to eat carbs, but nowhere near to the level of a double training day. And so things, we would put out different protein options. We would put out more of a vegetable or salad based option just to get their boys to still be consuming lots of calories, but it's not as a carb heavy intake. And then as you approach the game day, you then start to really think about, right, every opportunity at breakfast, lunch, and snacks, have they got the opportunity, the capability, and the motivation to want to fuel correctly for the game? And that's where I've seen some really good wins with observing natural behaviors around the boys not wanting to eat too much and feel heavy going into games, and therefore the ability for them to be able to fuel adequately and still hit the carbohydrate content requirements, but with liquids as well. And that's been a big kind of reflection point for me. I've heard it a lot from different players and athletes, and this is not just rugby. This is football. This is boxing. This is water sports. Athletes don't like going into competition feeling heavy,
Mm.
and certainly feeling like they've got a heavy stomach with lots of food in. And so, therefore, the ability to give somebody a drink and say, well, there's 50 grams of carbohydrate in this, or would you rather eat a jacket potato? They're always going to go for the fluid. Like, that's my observation. That's what I'm seeing. And so, yeah, just really being mindful of increasing that carbohydrate content leading into competition. But okay, well, where are the carbs coming from? Have they got the opportunity to fuel and still feel light? Is something that I've picked up on a lot. Yeah.
How does that help with hydration as well? Because that's another key factor to performance in game, isn't it? Making sure everybody's hydrated. And I'd imagine if you can aid that in any way by linking the two, that's got to help, hasn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And that's where, a food first approach is always the goal, especially when you've got a great chef in camp. However, supplements do help, and supplements come in handy when we are traveling around the world, or we might have a travel day heading over to a stadium or a captain's run. And that's where, yeah, the supplementations, electrolytes, hydration powders, a combination of the two, even combining carbohydrate blends into the hydration powders. These are all aspects that will help both the fueling and the hydration aspect leading into the fixture.
you play the first 40 minutes, you get to half time. That's, I imagine, one of the more intense periods in a dressing room during a game, because you've got a finite time for the head coach to perhaps pass on his observations. One of the players, the captain, might want to rally the troops and say a few words at the same time. And equally, I imagine the pressures on you and your team as well to make sure that you can make the most of that reduced time to rehydrate, refuel the players, and get them ready to go again. So what does that look like?
Yeah, it's a good challenge. It really is. And there quite often is something that might happen at half time where a player has a niggle and they need to go and see the physio, and that's the requirement. Or there might be a player having a conversation with the ref in the tunnel regarding something, and so they don't quite come in as early as you'd hope them to. Um, but the one thing that we have a really good system whereby I look at the opportunity. Again, I talk about the capability and the opportunity for players to fuel as soon as they cross that white line, or even before they've got into the changing room, because I look at that and I go, there's potentially a 25-30 second window here where I can get something into them straight away. And at that point, all they're doing is they're crossing the line and they might be having a chat with their teammate, or they might be processing the first half. And I almost try to remain invisible but also present. So I'm there in the eye line of players and athletes, whereby, okay, as they're coming towards me, they can see that I've got the opportunity for them to fuel. They've got the capability because it's right in front of me, it's in my hands, and I don't even talk to them. It's just eye line, connect the eye, bang, off they go. They take what they need. In the dressing room, all of their seats and all of their pegs are ready, so they're all replenished from what they had used in the before the game after the warm up. So that's all replenished and that's all there and available. Ranging from carbohydrate gels, caffeine gels, normal water, carbohydrate blends, fluids. So I've now hit them with two opportunities to increase fuel availability in this halftime window, and then also once I get into the changing room, I'll do a quick swoop around the whole squad. And again, I've got things in my hand. I'm looking at them. I'm getting the eye contact. I'm not saying anything to anyone, but it's just like almost nodding to say, "Are you good? Are you happy? Everything good?" And then I always try and stand there away, like when everybody's talking, but stand there so that if somebody does need something, they can quickly catch my eye line. They don't even need to say anything. They might just do a gesture, and I know what they need, and then it's chuck it over, and they've got it. Um, then it's they talk. They do what they need to do at half time. Once all of the talking's done, and then they're ready and they start prepping to go out for the second half. Again, it will be a quick another swoop. Anyone need anything? Are we good? Are we good? Are we good? And then out they go for that second half.
That
The one thing I would,
suggests that, sorry to interrupt there, that suggests there's a strong relationship between you and the playing staff then there, because there's trust, there's confidence. You are obviously giving them the opportunity to pick up anything that they need. You're empowering them to know their own body and know what it's telling them in the process. Are there any times when perhaps a player doesn't take advantage of that and you then feel you have to intervene because you've got the data and analytics at your disposal that might be telling you something else?
yes, and yeah and no. Like I think through my career, the better my actionable outcomes with my players is when the better and tighter the trust is between me and the player. Ultimately, my job as a performance nutritionist at England Rugby is to make these players be the best rugby player they can possibly be from a performance nutrition point of view, which encompasses, you know, maximizing training adaptation from nutrition, body composition, maximizing sleep and recovery, maximizing muscle repair. On game day, it's about have have they got everything they need to have the best 40-minute first half they can ever have, and then the best second 40-minute half they can ever have. And the second 40-minute half is always a bit tougher because you're carrying 40 minutes of tiredness and a 40-minute test match in front of you into the second half. And so there are moments where I'm scanning across and I'm looking at players and if I've handed them out in the tunnel, but a player hasn't took something off of me, when I'm then in the changing room, I'm then looking at that player to see whether they're going to take something from their peg. If they take it from their peg, okay, I'm happy. They're
Mm.
registering. But there are times where a player might miss me in the tunnel because they're talking to someone, then they miss me, or they don't then do the peg because, something else is happening. And then that's kind of like registered in my brain to go, right, as soon as you can, get yourself over to said player, just tap them on the shoulder, bang, remember this, remember this. It doesn't need to be anything more than that. And there are occasions when that happens. That's just elite sport. That's just changing room at half time, and it's an amazing energy. It really is um, a fantastic place to be at half time. But there are times when, yeah, the strategy doesn't get nailed because something else, arguably more important, has got in the way. Like they need to see the physio. Um, the one thing I was going to say just earlier was that a lot of this can be discussed with your players away from the stadium. So a couple of days before the game, you practice it in training. You might show them the product and say, look, this is, your first cap player. This is the product that's going to be present at the changing room. Why don't you give it a go during training? Just have it like halfway through. I'll run over. I'll give it to you. Just see how you feel. Let's get an element of familiarization so that when we then get to the game, it's all good. It's not new and you're happy. And I've done that a number of times where I'll show them this is what I'm going to give you on game day. You've tried it in training now. It was thumbs up. You were good with it. I'm happy with it. Just a nudge that tomorrow. This is what I'll be giving you at half time. Yeah, no problem. And again, that's built on trust. Like I'm not there to try and win the game myself. I'm there to help the players have the best second half they possibly can. And I know nutrition will have an impact on that.
And quite clearly, from what you're telling us there is an enormous value in preparation. If you lay the groundwork a couple of days before you get to what you know is going to be one of the most intense and in a quiet, organised fashion, chaotic periods where time is of the essence, then suddenly everything slows down a little bit. And that is quite often the hallmark of a good setup and team, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. But people talk about flow state, and when you're just in the moment, and I think we would have all experienced times of that when it's a good game. Everything from the nutrition area and discipline, it just went well. But also there are times where something wasn't quite nailed, and why was that? Was the comms with the stadium regarding the post-match food not early enough, or you know did the player really understand what he needed to do during the game from a fueling point of view? That's a reflection on me as a coach, and then you go back and you review that. But I think that's just the art of being a coach, and reviewing your practices and your standard operating procedures to make sure that the next game it is nailed. But yeah, the when the games flow and the 80-minute happens and you're like, wow, where did that go?
Yeah, for sure. And you might think that once that final whistle blows and 80 minutes is up on the clock, there'll be some downtime, a period to take a deep breath and just relax a little bit. But I know from speaking to colleagues, they would tell me that that is absolutely the time when quite often many need to put the most effort in. And I know recently on your LinkedIn page, you posted a video post game of nutrition, hydration, what needs to be done immediately in the first 10, 15 minutes after the players come off the pitch. And there was everything there from milk, chocolate milk to sushi on the table. Talk us a little bit through that.
Yeah, look, if we go back to classical literature to start with, you've just done an international test match, 80 minutes. I speak about exercise-induced muscle damage, the utilization of glycogen as a fuel source during rugby match play. Then you've got impact-induced muscle damage. So you've got at the end of the game, and when you see these players sitting in the changing room, and it's been a genuine test match. These boys are tired. They're tired. They're sore. Their bodies are aching. And so I then look at, wow, we now have this window of opportunity in the changing room. Some of the first things that they're going to put past their mouth to help them recover, to help them replenish the energy, to get the glycogen back into the muscle, to kickstart the antioxidant, anti-inflammatory process. You know, And I look at that and I think, go back to the classical literature, and you think, right, 1 gram per 1 gram per kilo of carbohydrate for the first 4 hours post exercise is what we know can help replenish glycogen.
Mm.
You combine that in with creatine, and it will help the glycogen into the membrane. So that's important. And then you think good quality protein, obvious that we know that the protein is going to help recover the muscles. And then you then think of the antioxidants, anti-inflammatories that we can get in, but also energy. The boys need energy to recover. You can't like I quite often talk about a Formula One high collision crash. Like when that car has had that crash, it needs a team of mechanics and it needs hundreds of thousands of pounds to repair it. You can't do it without it. So I look at my players when they've finished the game and they've had this high collision muscle damage crash. You can't repair it without energy, and you can't repair it without good quality nutrition available. And so the reason that we have a mixture of kind of finger food and then the chocolate milk and other liquids and beverages is it's quick, it's easy, it can be implemented and executed in a changing room environment while the lads are chatting with each other, and they're obviously, chatting about the game, or they're with their families or kids. And so that's why you see the spread that you see, because I'm trying to tick the box of window of opportunity. What's the first thing that's going back into their mouth to help them repair, help them recover, help them re-energize? And then we then go back to the hotel, and then we'll have a bigger kind of buffet setup. But you're not going to get your sit down meal in the changing room, because it just, from a logistical point of view, it's just not going to work. And that's why something like sushi is so good, because it literally can be picked up,
Mm.
with the chopsticks. The lads are quite happy to put it in because it's small little sound bites that are going in. So yeah, that's why we have the spread we do.
And of course, at elite level sport, every second counts. And in the professional environment, you have the opportunity to make all these assets available. If you're uh, in the amateur game, you're playing just on a weekend, you might train twice a week on a Tuesday and Thursday night or something. If you're an amateur sportsman or a coach at an amateur club and you're listening to this podcast and you're saying, well, how can I just take a little bit of what James Morehen's saying and integrate it into what we do week in, week out? How can they transfer some of these principles? What advice would you give them?
I think from a fueling and carbohydrate point of view, I've presented this a couple of times at some kind of local rugby colleges, and I genuinely don't think the grassroots players fuel correctly for the game. And I say that because I've had first-hand experience of professional players not fueling correctly for the game. And I look at the opportunity and the capability that the professional players have, and I think, okay, well, I'd be surprised if any of the grassroots players are absolutely nailing the 6 gram per kilo. So I would genuinely look at what you're eating the day before a game, and is every meal opportunity carbohydrate heavy? Breakfast, lunch, dinner,
Mm.
snacks. Are we increasing carbohydrate content the day before? And if you're not, then do it. Um, then I look at the day of the game. Again, there'll be so many grassroots players that arrive to the game and they probably just sip on Lucozade, or they don't, they just have water. So again, when we look at classical literature, we know that anything above kind of 60 minutes of exercise, we're going to need at least 30, 40, maybe 50, 60 grams of carbohydrates per hour of exercise. So if you're not currently having Lucozade or some gels or a banana or Jaffa cakes or jelly beans, whatever your carb option choice is, then bring that in. Bring that in at half time and increase your fuel availability during exercise. You'll have a better second half performance. And then the recovery, again, I would keep it really simple. A chocolate flavored milk is great because you've got the milk, you've got the protein, you've got the carbohydrates and the sugars to get the energy back in. Um, but then be prepared and make a recovery smoothie. So it can be really simple: milk, banana, avocado, load of frozen mixed berries. And if you want to add in a scoop of whey protein to bolster the protein content, then do it. But that's a 3 or 4 minute job before your fixture. Take it with you, put some ice in it to keep it cool, and you've got your recovery smoothie post game. What you typically find in the grassroots game is the game is finished, up to the clubhouse, pint of beer, chips and sausage, and then they wonder why they're sore the next day. Well, you're probably sore because you've actually just consumed a load of pro-inflammatory nutrients, which are promoting the inflammatory markers that you've already got. So, yeah, and it kind of gets me excited because I look at the grassroots game and I think, wow, I think there are so many players that do not understand or appreciate the impact that nutrition could have on their performance at that level.
Yeah, let's be clear. We're not saying go out to the local store and buy the whole shelf of Jaffa cakes, but it really can be that simple for something. Say at half time, you mentioned post game players liking to be able to pick at something like sushi. If you put a couple of packets of Jaffa cakes at the player's disposal, that's not going to fill them up, but it can have a positive impact. You feel as they go out for the second half.
Yeah, okay. Like we would utilize supplementation at England because we have the opportunity to do it. But certainly at the grassroots game, you know, if it was my son's 18-year-old team right now, and at half time they don't have any carbohydrate availability, I'd be looking at Jaffa cakes, jelly beans, maybe some Rice Krispie bars, granola bars, bananas. Lucozades or other off the shelf kind of electrolyte carbohydrate blends, and you know, get the boys encouraging to consume them, practice it in training, practice it in the second half, and you will go out with energy into that second half. I liken it to you know, we all charge our iPhone overnight, right? We get 100%. And we wake up in the morning, we've got 100% battery charge. So if you arrive to your game with 100% energy in your body, 100% iPhone charge. You then do your warm up. So your warm up, you go from 100 to maybe 80%. So if you're not replenishing after the warm up, then you're at 80%. So you start the game at 80%. Now, depending on the demands and the physicality of the first 40 minutes, the 80% could then maybe go to, let's call it 50%, maybe 40%. Now, if you don't recharge and replenish the glycogen and carbohydrate at half time, you're starting the second half at 50 or 40%. So, is it any wonder at some point in that second half, you see players that get fatigued? So, that 40% is now entering the realms of that horrible amber color on the iPhone, where we see the battery go from green to amber, and then 20% happens, and we're in the red zone.
And panic
Is it
sets in
any?
at this point.
Yeah. So is there any wonder then that second half performances appear to dive off and fall off the edge of a cliff because you've gone into the second half at 50 or 40%. You haven't replenished. So the aim of the game really is after the warm up, you know, get half a banana in, like get the carbs back in, go out to the second half. Then at half time, you really have to get the fuel in at half time if you want to go and have a good second half performance, which is on par with the first half performance. And then I imagine my hypothesis at the grassroots level would be that if you're the better fueled team in the second half and your opposition team is running out of energy, the gaps open up. Players are fatiguing. You know, the whippy number nine or the quick winger and fullback have got the opportunity just to pick the holes out and run all the way through because the rest of the players are fatiguing and tiring.
Yeah, for sure. And as we touched upon earlier, you are the owner of the Performance Nutrition Network for people that are interested. I'm sure there are plenty listening to this podcast today, James, that you've already set off a light bulb moment for them and there'd be ideas that they'd want to explore. Is that the best way to get in touch and discuss ideas with you, or do you have other social platforms that you would advise them to get in touch with?
Yeah, look, Instagram, Morehen Performance, LinkedIn, I'm on there quite often, and then yeah, I run the Performance Nutrition Network, and it's a global online platform for nutritionists, dietitians, other athlete support personnel. We've got chefs in there, we've got business owners, and it is a place where we all learn off of each other. We all put our own questions in there, you know, lessons that we've got from the applied nutrition field. And it's great because you've got people that are sharing their advice, their lessons, resources, you know, things that I've done well in applied practice that others can learn from. And then we run webinars and kind of community get-togethers in there as well, because I think the art of human competitive performances is built on relationships and connectivity with each other. And so it's a real big thing of mine is how we can stay connected as an industry and learn off of each other. Because at the end of the day, we're all, like I said, failed athletes, but we're all trying to help our athletes be the best athletes they can be. And there'll be lessons that I've got in rugby that somebody in basketball can pick up on and go, interesting. I'll apply that to the NBA and see how that lands, and vice versa. I'm learning off of people that are doing the ultra marathons, which I've never worked in, but I'm looking at what people are sharing in the community and thinking, that's interesting. If I could take 20% of how people fuel for the ultra into team sport, that might help my players become better fueled athletes.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll just finish off by, like you say, where we started. You mentioned you're a failed stroke frustrated sportsman, athlete right at the outset of your career. I've heard you talk passionately about your field of work today, but also you mentioned basketball, ultra marathons, other sports. Have you managed to scratch that itch as a frustrated sportsman, or is there still part of you that occasionally just can't be contained and you do think, well, maybe I could give the ultra marathon a go?
Yeah, do you know what? I really enjoy my own training. So I've done 2 Hyroxes. I've done the marathon. I'm going to sign up for another marathon, but my current training modality is the halves. So my late father had the family record for the half marathon, which was an hour 35 or 32. So I did the Windsor half. I did that in an hour 29, and then I've got Copenhagen half in September, and I'll put it out here so I've got accountability. But I'm aiming for an hour 25. So yeah, running is what I'm into at the moment, with a sprinkling of weights training.
So you're currently the proud owner of the family half marathon record and you're looking to better it later this year.
Correct, yeah. On a very flat Copenhagen half.
A well-chosen course by the sounds of it. Listen, Dr. James
Yeah.
Morehen, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on this week's podcast. We wish you all the very best with the upcoming tour to Argentina in the summer. And as we've pointed out to our listeners and viewers, if they do want to get in touch with you, they can do across all the social media platforms that you have available.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. We hope to speak to you again. Thanks, James.
Cheers. Take care.
Unlocking sports science to push the limits of human potential. This is the Science for Sport podcast.
Many thanks to Dr. James Morehen, both for his time and expertise in the field of sports nutrition. And if what he's had to say interests you and you want to find out more, you can do so by visiting our website, www.scienceforsport.com. And if you've enjoyed this particular edition of the podcast, please do feel free to share it with a coach, a colleague, an athlete, or a friend. Remember, the more downloads we get, the easier it then is for us to attract top-name athletes or people like Dr. James Morehen at the leading edge of their field. Well, that is just about all for this week's episode. Thanks for listening. I look forward to the next time we can all talk again on the Science for Sport podcast.
Subscribe to the Science for Sport podcast now, wherever you listen to your podcasts. For more insights, resources, and to join the Academy, visit scienceforsport.com and connect with us on social media by searching for @ScienceForSport. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.